There's 1.7 million pilots in the world, but there's only one Bob Lutz. He's a special pilot, right? There's lots of car executives. Some would say too many car executives, but there's only one Bob Lutz. Bob has been, for those of you who are too young to have enjoyed the years when Bob was quoted almost daily in the Detroit papers and around the world in anything automotive, comments like, "These cars look like angry kitchen appliances," was a great comment. And it made a lot of us in the design field catch our breath and say, well, yeah, maybe he's right. That does kind of look like a toaster, doesn't it? He's never been shy about sharing his thoughts, and we are really, really honored to have him here today to share freely whatever is on his mind, and then we'll have some great questions from this panel to the right of us. Would you please welcome Mr. Bob Lutz.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, and good morning to all of you. I don't know whether, can you hear me okay in the back? All right, good, outstanding. Yeah, well, Brian was kind enough to point out my seeming uniqueness, and I used to think I was the only Bob Lutz, and it turns out that during a major portion of my career, there was a professional tennis player by the name of Bob Lutz. And so he was quite a bit more famous than I was notorious, and to the point where the German media always had me down as not only a senior automotive executive, but also a world-class tennis player. And I think I've handled a tennis racket once in my life, having been careful my whole life to avoid sports involving the use of balls. So then one time I was being interviewed by the media, and I told that story, and then I said, so I had long ago given up the dream of being the most famous Bob Lutz, but I think I can claim to be the only Bob Lutz who spent 11 years as a fighter pilot in the U.S. Armed Forces. And that interview was on televised or printed or something, and I promptly got 3 letters from fighter pilots by the name of Bob Lutz. One was a World War II P-51 pilot, and then I got letters from 2 more who were F-15 pilots. So there goes the uniqueness. Then the other one is you notice that if you look at my series of employers, which is it was partly a sign of me being tired of whatever employer I was with, or it was also the employer being tired of me. And while I was never actually fired, but I had developed this fine sixth sense of when it was about time to leave before I was actually asked to depart. Because like many people who try to get things done, and getting things done is not always popular. You find corporate America, the military, corporate everywhere in the world, whether it's Toyota or Mercedes-Benz or Volkswagen, most large organizations are peopled with folks who do the job, keep their head down, hope they can make it to retirement, don't stick your head out, don't argue with the boss, just do what's expected of you and try not to draw too much attention. The trouble with that is that not a hell of a lot gets done. And people who actually try to get things done, they're also known as change agents, these people tend to argue, tend to say unpopular things like in the meeting, say that doesn't sound like a very good idea, or why are we doing it this way? It's hugely wasteful. Or, as I was transitioning through employers, the hugely popular thing at Ford was to say, this is how we did it at BMW. Or later at Chrysler, it was tremendously popular to say, this is how we did it at Ford. Because nobody really wants to know how you did it, how it was done at your old employer, which is silly, because there is no automobile company that is so good that it has the best way, or no company that's so good that it has the best way of doing everything. And it's very useful for companies to benchmark each other or to show a willingness to learn, as opposed to developing an internal culture which is so self-congratulatory and so full of its own, the genius of its own accomplishments, that it thinks we have nothing to learn from anybody. We should be teaching everybody else because we know we're the world's best. And that's the attitude that prevailed for decades at General Motors, because at one time in the 60s, it would have been hard to argue that General Motors wasn't the world's best. They had the best engineered cars, the best designed cars. They were heading for 60% market share in the United States. There was a risk that the Justice Department was starting to talk about breaking General Motors up into pieces under the Anti-Monopoly Act, and so forth. And General Motors developed this internal belief that it was almost like a religion, that we're so great, nobody can hold a candle to us. What, the Japanese, those upstarts, they'll never go anywhere. We're General Motors, and when we make up our minds that it's time to stop the Japanese, by George, we'll push them back into the Pacific so fast it'll make their heads spin. And an organization like that refuses to learn. And when an organization refuses to adopt ideas from others and refuses to listen to the dissent in its own ranks, it's a very dangerous sign. So I always tell, especially students, oysters produce pearls, and the way oysters produce pearls is the way they breathe is they're constantly ingesting water and then getting the oxygen out of it and then blowing the water out again. A lot of times when they suck in water, they get sand, and they usually manage to blow all the sand out again with the incoming water. But sometimes a grain of sand gets stuck, and then it becomes an irritant, and a little shell of hard calcium forms around that jagged little piece of sand and becomes round and smooth. And over time, that little nodule becomes bigger and bigger until it becomes a pearl. So the irritating piece of sand is what produces the pearl in the oyster. That's the good news. The bad news is if the piece of sand is too big, too jagged, and too irritating, the oyster finds a way to get rid of it. And thus it is with people in an organization who want to drive change. You have to do just the right amount to get to just the ragged edge where people say, boy, what a pain in the butt he is. And then the next guy says, yeah, but he's doing a lot of good. As long as the he's doing a lot of good outweighs the pain in the butt part, you're safe. But if it starts to tip, and I've had people at all of my employers that I've had to encourage to make an even greater contribution elsewhere, because I said, look, you're a brilliant guy, but you are so disruptive that you spout an idea a minute, you disrupt every meeting, You're constantly telling everybody else they're wrong, and maybe they are, but you're at it so much that everybody has decided whatever intellectual brilliance you may possess, and however great your ideas, it's just tough to retain you in an organization. So yeah, be disruptive, try to find the right balance as you go through your careers, and be just disruptive enough to drive change and move the organization forward, but not to the point where you become the grain of sand that the oyster spits out. As you look at my list of employers, you saw that General Motors was at the beginning. Well, actually, the Marine Corps was at the beginning, to whom I owe my education and my sense of values and just about everything else that permitted me to become successful in life, as opposed to a failed son of an upper-class banking family. So General Motors was first after the Marine Corps, and then General Motors was last. I joined General Motors after 3 years as CEO of a battery company, which was the first CEO job that was offered to me after I was forced to retire from Chrysler at age 66, something I very much regretted, but it seems like just when you're old enough to have figured out how the business actually works, they put you out to pasture. Mm-hmm. And it's, I think, a great waste of experience and intellectual capacity, but so be it. So I was CEO of a battery company for a while, and then at age 70, I was hired by GM to be vice chairman for product development, which was something that General Motors really badly needed at the time. General Motors had placed themselves in the hands of a bunch of extremely smart people, some of them internal, some of them consultants, who had tried to reduce the automobile business to a science where everything could be measured. There were, hundreds of metrics, hundreds of initiatives for improvement, and everybody was trying really hard. But and they were focusing, and everything had an equal focus. Diversity, as valuable as it may be, but diversity is not the end goal of a business. Diversity is an enabler that helps the company to reach its real goal, which is build superior products that please the public more than the products built by the competition. And I remember one of my first meetings at GM. It was one of these, every vice president in the corporation, so that was about 35 or 40 people in the room. And we had this big slide on the screen, and it was a matrix, and it showed all of the corporate priorities. And it was, I think, about 5 across and 5 down, and it had stuff in it like increase use of Asian suppliers, and then increase female vice presidents, and then reduce number of hits per stamping, and all of these noble initiatives that the company was working on. And somewhere in the middle of the matrix was a little cube or a little square called maintain product excellence. And I just said, wait a minute, hold the phone, stop the meeting. And I said, this is so wrong. The problem with your matrix is it's not that these aren't all legitimate initiatives and wonderful things to be working on, but that most of them are all ancillary to the big one, which is the one that's buried in the middle, which is maintain product excellence. And your diagram, to be legitimate, should be a diagram that looks like a sunflower with a great big black circle in the middle called Achieve Product Excellence. And then all these other little initiatives like reduce cost 5% next year, et cetera, are like the little yellow leaves around the edge of the sunflower. They're necessary, they're there, they help, but they are not the main focus of what you're supposed to do. The problem with what I call the intellectualization of General Motors was that people had growingly lost the focus on why is it that we're in business. And I tried to get that focus back by really getting people to realize that customer satisfaction, beating the competition in product quality and product design was the quintessential purpose of the organization. And guess what? None of the other initiatives, not the social ones, not the environmental ones, nothing works if you don't get the big one right, which is customer satisfaction and the best product that you could possibly do. So I like to think that the lessons that I tried to implant in General Motors during my second 10 years there have been maintained, but sometimes I wonder, and I'll give you a little example. Out comes the latest generation of Chevy Silverado pickup. And I look at the back end, and there's no identification on it. And upon second glance, I say, oh, wait, yes, there is. They use a composite lift gate, and the word Chevrolet, by the way, the bow tie cost about $3, so that was gone. And the name Chevrolet was debossed into the lift gate. Well, that's okay if you, on dark colors, lay in some silver paint into the letters, or white paint, or into the light colored ones, you lay in some dark paint. I think the Chevy bow tie is a nice piece of jewelry, but if the word Chevrolet is legible enough, I guess you can do without it. But to not have a bow tie and have a word Chevrolet debossed in white into a white lift gate to where nobody can see it, and then you go around to the front and it was the same thing on the front end. There was no identification, and also a cheap interior, which didn't help. So once again, it was an example of General Motors being back to its old tricks of assuming we're the best. If we bring it out, people are going to love it, and strip the interior, strip the exterior. Not saying it wasn't a good truck, but building a good truck isn't enough anymore. It's got to have visual appeal. It's got to make the customer want to come in and buy, and you do that primarily through the eyes. And then if you compare the Chevy to a Dodge Ram, or nowadays just pure Ram, where Ram gets it. If you look at a Ram, all of the lettering, the Ram lettering is about the chrome letters this thick. The Ram badge is beautiful. I mean, these trucks are beautifully decorated and have beautiful interiors. So what happens after a year of the new Chevy Silverado being in the marketplace against the Dodge Ram or the Ram? The Ram becomes number 2 in sales and Chevy becomes number 3. And, I'm not supposed to get involved in this anymore, but I fired off email after email to the GM guys saying, what were you thinking, taking all of the decoration off of the truck? Oh, no, it's okay, don't worry, no, nobody noticed, et cetera. But now I see a friend of mine just bought a late model 22 Chevy Silverado, and the stuff is all back on. Not only is the Chevrolet lettering done in a contrasting paint in the debossed area, but the Chevy bow tie is back on as well. So the corporation showing signs of having to learn the same stupid stuff over and over again. And I guess that's the way of human nature. I will say that when I rejoined General Motors, I was 70. And that was 20 years ago, so you can figure out my current age. We were at a press conference down in one of the basement auditoriums at General Motors when Rick Wagner was introducing me to the media. And one reporter asked Mr. Wagner, is it not true that General Motors has a 65 and out policy for its executives? And Wagner said, yes, that's correct. And then the guy said, and how do you explain the hiring of Mr. Lutz? And Rick Wagner said, well, it's corporate policy that executives have to leave at 65. But we do not have a policy that says we can't hire 70-year-olds. So at any rate, that's, I could go on and on about, the future of electrification, but I think it's time to stop now and ask our esteemed panel for questions. So
let's thank Mr. Lutz for a second.
As long as I have something to lean on, I'm fine.
Okay, that's fine. All right. I'm going to grab this so that we don't interrupt that. We wanted to do something a little different, and when we first invited Mr. Lutz to come, we talked about go forward. When we invited Mr. Lutz to come, we wanted to find a little different approach to instead of just us listening and calling out from the crowd. So I talked to our education network, and they asked the educators to help me select a handful of young students who are automotive intended in their careers, and they represent all different disciplines, design, engineering, marketing. They're at different levels, a couple of high school students, a couple of about to graduate college students, about to enter the business. And we met about a month ago and talked about, well, what would you ask a guy who's done all the things that you saw on the screen? And not just what advice he has for your career, but what his thoughts are about the future. So with that, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, tell us what school you represent, and what your career direction is, okay? We're going to start with Miranda.
All right, so I am Miranda Rumfelt. I am a senior at Lawrence Tech. I'm studying transportation design, so I will actually be going to General Motors as a sculptor in June, full-time. But I'm also a former Drive 1 student, so some of the students are here today from Drive 1, and that's actually where I started and was introduced to automotive design with Mr. Brian Baker. Yeah.
My name is Evan. I'm a student at Livonia Churchill. I'm a junior. My interest for college is product design or industrial design, and my hopes are to go to CCS for that, and I'm pretty excited about that. So,
thanks, Evan. Elena.
Hi, my name is Elena Sanabria. I go to Franklin High School. I go to Career Center for engineering and a medical class. I am a senior, and I think I'm going to go into biomedical engineering at Lawrence Tech.
I'm Anthony Giacalone. I am a senior at Northwood University studying automotive marketing and management. And my career aspirations are kind of go to corporate. I want to do product marketing at Volkswagen.
Very good. Miranda, you get the first question.
All right, so we talked a little bit how you were at Exide battery, and I am curious to know, you said you went there because that was the first place that offered you a CEO position.
Yes.
But I'm curious to know, what did you learn there that helped you once you went back into the automotive industry?
Well, that's an interesting question. I was asked by banks to become CEO of Exide Batteries, which had been run by a gentleman, run into the ground actually, by a gentleman by the name of Art Hawkins. And it didn't take me long to figure out that Art Hawkins, who was under investigation by the SEC and by the attorneys general of the state of Florida, state of Illinois and various for shipping defective batteries, et cetera, et cetera. And I was advised that I not only did I need to get rid of the board, which had been, if not complicit, at least they had failed in their fiduciary duty of adequately supervising senior management. And it turned out that a huge number of senior executives at Exide were all in on the scam, whether it was kickbacks from suppliers or mislabeling batteries as to their capability, because batteries contain lead, and the automotive batteries, lead acid batteries, or so-called SLI batteries, starter, light, and ignition. And the more lead, the longer the battery lasts and the more cranking amps it has, et cetera. Well, Art Hawkins figured out that if you reduce the number of plates in the battery, it didn't matter how you labeled them. Nobody ever weighed a battery before they put it in the car. So he's starting to reduce the lead content and recycling batteries that had been returned and so forth and so on. And it finally wound up, I had to fire about 20 or 30 senior executives, predominantly in sales and procurement. I had to explain to the board that they had to go, and I had to cooperate with the attorneys general and help put Art Hawkins, plus the chief operating officer, plus the chief financial officer, all did between 5 and 10 years' time in federal prisons. So what did I learn? I think the number one lesson was you've got to run a business with absolute integrity. If you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. And you might artificially boost profits by shaving a little, legally or illegally, shaving cost, but in the long term, it comes back to bite you. And the Exide batteries that I took over, or that I tried to run after the cleanup, was a very weak and imperiled company, which ultimately years after I left, but it ultimately failed. And it had been weakened by a gang, we can only describe it as a gang of very intelligent, very nice looking, very well spoken, well educated crooks. So what I learned is the lesson that I first got in the Marine Corps, which is honor and integrity are more important than anything else. And if you have a decent moral compass, and you always ask yourself, am I morally doing the right thing here? Am I obeying the law? You don't shirk from that duty. That's the most important thing.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Evan.
So Mr. Lutz, in an interview in 2020, you explained how you thought Tesla as a company will tank in the near future, both from its non-unique technology as well as its temporary cornering of the market. Especially with current prices of gas and current events, what do you think is your opinion on that matter? Do you still have the same opinion?
Oh, of what?
Tesla.
The future of Tesla.
Oh, yeah. Well, Tesla, I think even Elon Musk later admitted that they were weeks away from bankruptcy at some point. But he skated through. He's become a lot more mature as a businessman. He's stopped provoking the SEC and other government organs, although I notice he's routinely criticizing the president for failing to, when he talks about electric vehicles, he talks about Ford and GM, but he never talks about Tesla, and Elon Musk feels somewhat hurt by that. So he criticizes the president, which I guess is right. As private citizens, I think it is our right to criticize our political leaders, but if you're CEO of a major corporation, it's not a particularly smart thing to do. So he's still showing signs of immature behavior, even though I think he's probably around in his 50s now. But there's no question that he's running a good automobile company. And it's an automobile company that not only has good battery technology, its battery technology is no better than anybody else's, but we were talking earlier about driving change and taking risk. I think he's on the ragged edge of always accepting too much risk. Like a lot of their autonomous features are at a reliability level where companies like Toyota, Ford, and General Motors would not release those to the public. But Elon Musk says, yeah, it'll be all right, So, okay, so we'll have one or two failures, but what the hell? We'll send a software update. But there's no question it is today a very successful company. Will they take over the world? No, they won't, because battery electric vehicles built by General Motors, Ford, Toyota, Nissan, Hyundai, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, et cetera, will have equal capabilities. And he will always be recognized as the pioneer. And let me tell you really the smartest thing that Elon Musk did. When people were toying with electric vehicles, whether it was in Europe where Renault had a few and Peugeot had a few, and then General Motors had one in the EV1, the thought was always electric vehicles are for people who can't afford gasoline. Therefore, the electric vehicle has to be small, cheap, and weird looking. There was a law of physics that says that for an electric vehicle to be credible, it must look weird. So they always came out, they were always small, they were always ugly, they were always overpriced for what they were, and they never sold. And Elon Musk did exactly the opposite. After the Roadster, which was kind of, testing the waters, and he didn't really build that. It was a Lotus with a Tesla battery. But when they did the Model S, they got one of the best designers in the world, same guy that did the Pontiac Solstice that's out there, Franz von Holzhausen, which caused German journalists to say, ach, yeah, German. I said, no, wrong. Third generation American. It just happens to be called Franz von Holzhausen. And Franz von Holzhausen designed this gorgeous, premium-looking sedan, which people would have bought even if it had had a gas-guzzling V8 in it. And they priced it very high. So Elon was smart in going for the premium end of the market first, and then establishing a reputation as a premium manufacturer of high technology, high-priced vehicles, and then moving off of that plateau and filling in at lower levels. General Motors didn't grasp that. General Motors, instead of doing the Chevy Volt, which was a well-engineered and interesting car, even if it did also have a piston engine. But that same technology could have been applied to a Cadillac, and we could have charged $100,000, and it would have been successful. So Elon is a very smart man. I do believe that he's a guy who could never make it on his way up in a normal corporation, because he'd be fired way before he got to the top. And the same is true for many entrepreneurs like that. There's only one job that they can hold, and that's number one. And they have to found their own company, because they'd never make it up through the ranks with their behavior and their personalities. So yeah, Tesla is here to stay. I think they're well run, produce good products, but they're going to be, one of many.
Good thoughts. Ilana.
All right. Mr. Lux, so electric vehicles are going to become more popular in like the future. What effects can it have on like other like industries such as like the medical or aviation? Like could the electrical kind of play part in aircrafts?
I didn't get all of that, I'm sorry.
So,
She's asking the impact of electrics on other peripheral industries like aircraft and medical.
Oh,
and such.
okay, because of battery, automotive
Yeah,
battery
battery
technology?
technology.
Yeah, well, batteries have always been essential as an energy storage device, and batteries can be mechanical, like in hydroelectric, where during off-peak hours, water is pumped up into a mountain lake, and then during peak hours, it goes down these huge tubes and powers turbines and fills a lake at the bottom, and then during the off-peak hours, they pump the water back up. Switzerland is just full of reservoir lakes like that with a dam, and then outside you see these huge metal tubes heading down to lower level turbines. And it never occurred to me before, but they're nothing but batteries. So batteries can have many forms, and the most popular form right now, of course, is electrochemical, and we are making significant advances. Lithium ion is about as good as we have right now, but there'll be rapid advances being made in lithium ion. We're talking about lithium polymer, which would be a solid state battery that's probably 5 years out. But the next big change is going to be the use of silicone instead of carbon for anodes and cathodes. And I'm actually a board member of a company called Group 14 out in Seattle, which is about ready to go public. And they are among the leaders, perhaps the leader, and already affiliated with a major European automotive manufacturer. And that getting the carbon out of the anode and cathode and going to silicon increases the energy storage capability of any lithium-ion battery by 20 to 30%. So a battery pack that gets 300 miles now will go to 400, or alternatively, you can keep it at 300 and take 25% of the battery out, which is a huge cost and weight saving. But at any rate, it provides that flexibility. So with these advances in energy storage capability, every field that has to store electrical energy is going to benefit. I would say that for so-called uninterrupted power supply, or UPS as we called it at Exide, and that was a big part of the business, for communication centers, hospitals, et cetera, even electric forklift trucks, it's hard to beat the old lead-acid battery because gravity is there to support the battery. How much it weighs is irrelevant if it's in a stationary storage situation. So for emergency power supplies for hospitals, you have a room in the basement full of these tall, they're sort of shaped like cereal boxes, except much taller, lead-acid batteries. And it doesn't matter that each one of them weighs several hundred pounds because they're sitting on concrete. But you get to airplanes, and I am a huge skeptic when it comes to battery-powered airplanes. Why? Because the airplane has to lift all of this whole load of batteries up into the sky, and then it propels the airplane for a while. And the beauty of fossil fuel is, okay, the airplane takes off with a full load of jet fuel, but it burns it along the way. And as the flight progresses, the aircraft becomes lighter and lighter and more efficient. And finally, on landing, that is a very light airplane. Whereas in a battery-powered airplane, it's as heavy when it lands as when it took off maybe an hour ago. And I don't think it's going to be possible to get the range. So as I look at the transportation sector, I'm telling myself, airplanes are probably the last area where the internal combustion engine, and internal combustion, I include jets, where fossil fuel will be replaced. But in other things, medical devices where you need a long-lasting battery, like my dad had a pacemaker from about age 70, and every 5 years or so they had to cut him open to replace the battery. Well, I think I don't know what the state of the art is on pacemakers now, but I'm sure they're not cutting patients open that frequently anymore. And I would say that we're probably looking at a future where medical implants that require electrical energy will have a battery that's for the life of the patient. The CIA, by the way, Exide, we did make some batteries for the U.S. government that were made in a special little separate company that could be embedded in foreign embassies. When the carpenters went in and redid the trim, they drill a little hole, put the battery in, and then put the trim in place. And those were primary batteries. That means they could never be recharged, but they had exotic chemistry which caused those batteries to power listening devices, which could transmit to listening trucks down the street for 5 or 6 years. And they were never discovered. And I'm sure that our embassies in hostile countries, a lot of the banisters and picture frames contain those batteries too.
Fascinating. Thanks, Anthony, marketing guy, talk to us.
Yeah, never feel bad about being a marketing guy, because I went through my career and everybody always said, he's an engineer, he's an engineer, he's an engineer. No, he's not. I have an MBA in marketing.
So earlier you said be disruptive enough to drive change. So of the biggest disruptors in the industry, such as autonomy and electrification, what do you think will be the biggest effect in driving the change of the industry?
First of all, I think we're almost at the tipping point where a lot of people are starting to consider electric vehicles as opposed to conventional. And I think current fuel prices are helping drive that, although what's electricity made out of in the United States? 90% fossil fuel. So the people one of my fellow board members at Group 14 was rubbing his hands and saying, wow, Christmas has come early because this is really going to drive EV sales. And I said, no. Once the price of petroleum feeds into electricity generation, electricity is going to go up too. And the cost differential between fueling a conventional car and fueling an EV is going to stay about the same. It's all going to go up. Having said that, I think the number one deterrent today is still range anxiety. And of course, that was really prevalent when battery electric vehicles had ranges of 100, 150, 200 miles. Now, a lot of them are at 300 and 300 plus miles. Lucid Air is at, I think, 500 miles. And that's all good, but we have to remember, unlike gasoline, which provides about the same range regardless of climate conditions, but when you look at battery electric vehicles, there's a very distinct, it looks like a normal curve. And batteries deliver their full charge at about 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And you go beyond 75 degrees, you get into the 85 and 90 degrees, your range will fall off by 25 or 30%. And on the other side of the curve, as you head down into 32 degrees and below, it falls off also. So one of the things you always have to, people tell themselves correctly is, yeah, I'll get 400 miles on a nice late spring or early fall day, but what am I going to get when it's -5 out? And the answer is, when it's -5 out, you'll get half the quoted range. So that has to be overcome. The other alternative is get the recharging spots ubiquitous as gas pumps are today. And the charging time has got to come down. I mean, I've seen, I recently saw a video of a Tesla charging station in Europe. And it was at the end of some long weekend where everybody went for a drive. And it was in like a rectangular parking lot, nicely decorated with trees and bushes and everything. And there were maybe 15 or 20 charging stations. Every single one of them was occupied. And there was a line of Teslas, hundreds of yards long, waiting to get in for a charge. Well, you know, at the gas pump, it's 2 to 3 minutes. But to even get an 80% charge is 12 to 15 minutes with an EV, and for a full charge, it's hours. And that's something that's going to have to be addressed. It can also be addressed with, I don't know of anybody, or very few people, who will drive more than 500 miles a day. My gauge is, my daughter lives in North Barrington, Illinois, which is a suburb northwest of Chicago, just below the Wisconsin border. It's almost exactly 300 miles from my place in Ann Arbor. And my personal gauge on whether I want to buy an EV or not is, can I make that trip without recharge? And with a 300-mile range, I would say it's very dicey because, you know, I like to travel a little bit more than the legal limit on the freeway. And but let's say that battery technology gets to the point where in a normal battery pack, you've got 800 miles of range or 1,000 miles of range. At that point, recharge time is irrelevant because who's going to drive more than 1,000 miles a day? And when you reach your destination, you plug it in. And that, to me, is a super delightful thing about electric vehicles. And it's the other part that nobody ever mentions. No matter how much you've driven during the day, in the evening you plug it in, and next morning when you arrive, you've got a full tank. So every morning is a full tank, which is a pleasure you don't enjoy with a piston engine car. Let me give you, since you're a marketing guy like I was, a word of advice. I found that, and I hate to say this about my own occupational specialty, but about 80 to 90% of marketing guys in the automobile business, and this cuts across all brands, are brain dead. They're nice young men and women from middle-class backgrounds who couldn't handle the math for engineering, weren't skilled enough with a pencil to be designers, weren't good enough in accounting to become finance people. So what are we going to do with the boy? Well, there's always marketing or public relations, nowadays called communications. And I think a good marketing person can make a huge difference, and I tried to be one of those. But it means that you can't just adopt the formulaic approach and look at the average automobile commercial on TV today. I mean, how dumb are those? And how meaningless and how little do they say about the product? They give you very little reason to buy. Usually the only reason to buy is that we're having a big fall sale, or as the Europeans call them, investment opportunities. And the good marketing guy really involves him or herself with the rest of the business. And I found that my contribution to marketing was that I was always able to tell the product guys what to do next. Because I just knew from my interest in automobiles and being a passionate customer myself, I knew what turned people on and what turned people off. And I was always the advocate of the customer, arguing for better product, better product, better product, and spending a lot of time in design with the designers, kind of making sure that whatever came out, it's got to be, when the public first sees the new car, they've got to go, wow, only, well, I used to say 20,000. Now I say only 40,000 for all that? And if you've got that, you've got it made. And I became a successful marketing guy, not by coming up with clever ads, clever slogans, or doing merchandising materials better than the next guy. I became a success as a marketing guy by using my power as a marketing person to drive better product and better design. And if you're probably passionate about cars and trucks, which is, yeah, there you go. Well, use it. Use it. Don't be just another marketing guy.
Great advice. Miranda, you had another question.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about Elon Musk and how he's one of those people that he wouldn't survive in a big corporation trying to climb up the ladder, right?
Yeah.
So I would like to compare yourself to him in a way and say that you're one of those irritants, right?
Yeah.
So what made you decide that it was finally time to, kind of get out of that climbing the ladder and start your own business as you have now?
Oh, no, I never stopped climbing the ladder, but I don't think I would have been successful as an entrepreneur, because when you look at the human population that's professionally engaged in something, you've got the spectrum of, over here you've got people who are completely security oriented. Just give me a nice job with the Washtenaw Road Commission, and I'll shovel ditches or put up signs or do whatever they tell me. I don't want to get promoted. I just want a nice income, working for the county. They're never going to go broke. And then I'll retire after 25 years. That's the one spectrum, that people that like to work for governments or government entities, or in lower paid positions in large corporations. Over at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people like Elon Musk. And I've got a number of friends like that who, I had a friend who, he'd be up $100 million. He'd have another brilliant idea. Right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, he was going to put in supermarket malls in every town and village in former East Germany. He did that. The East Germans didn't understand it. It promptly went broke. He asked me for a loan. I give him a loan. 2 years later, he's up $100 million again, and he'd get a second mortgage on his house. And his wife, who was from a very wealthy Spanish family, would die 1,000 deaths with his antics. He finally did die wealthy, but the ups and downs never bothered him. And that's like the founder of Domino's Pizza. What's this? Monahan. He went bankrupt 7 times before he found the right formula for running that business. Well, I'll tell you, after the first bankruptcy, I'd say that's it. I'm going to go work for somebody that knows how to run a business. So, and most senior executives in everywhere, military, government, U.S. corporations, foreign corporations, doesn't matter. Most executives are to the security side of that center point between extreme safety-oriented people and extreme entrepreneurially oriented people. They're sort of lean more towards the safe side. I would say I was probably 30 degrees more towards the entrepreneurial side, not enough to be a successful entrepreneur, but enough to try to run the business like it was my own and take intelligent risk, which is absolutely necessary. If you don't take intelligent risk, you are not going to get rewarded. And it's true for any business where you're producing a product or a service. If you play it so safe that nothing can possibly go wrong, you're not going to get anywhere. It's just like reducing highway fatalities. I know how to reduce highway fatalities to zero. Drop the speed limit to 20 miles an hour nationwide. That's fine. Nobody gets killed anymore, but nobody goes anyplace either. So, anyway.
Evan, do you have a second question?
So obviously you're a fantastic speaker and presenter. What do you think were the biggest points that you hit in your career that helped you to become a lead presenter for big companies?
What single event or activity or?
What do you think you had in yourself that big companies noticed and said?
Oh, unquestionably being an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. That is the best leadership training that the world can give you.
That's it. That says it. Well said, sir. Elena, second question.
Okay, so we have like many young students here, and I know you said you went into marketing, and you weren't. Did you have the skills of like mathematics and drafting and stuff like that, or did you develop those skills that made you like where you are now? Like what kind of made you go into marketing, not like engineering or?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I've always been interested in engineering. I had to take engineering courses in flight training, design and operation of a piston engine, and then design, operation, and maintenance of jet engines, and so forth. So I had to learn about thermodynamics, combustion, materials, metallurgy, et cetera, et cetera. But to be a good engineer, I've always been passionate about engineering and engineering solutions, and I always soaked up the information very readily. But I just was not skilled at math. I just could not see myself handling the math that was necessary to be an engineer. But as I say, I was a good amateur engineer. And a lot of times the real engineers would say, "How did you know that?" And I said, "I don't know, I just knew it." But there was I think I'm an intuitive engineer, but not a trained one. It's the same thing with design. I whiled away many math and other classes in high school drawing cars. And one point when I was kicked out of yet another school, my father said, "So what is it we really want to do?" And I said, "Well, Dad, I want to be an automotive designer." And he said, "Well, let me see the pictures." And he went through my pathetic portfolio and said, "You know what? If you insist on going this route, I forecast a life of hardship and disappointment." But the point is, my artistic skills were enough that I could communicate with designers. And if I saw that something, to my eyes, was wrong with the design, I could take a piece of paper and a pencil and I'd say, "Okay, look, the rear fender line has to be more like this." And they'd understand it. They didn't always like it. And many times people would, the real designers would say, "You got to watch Lutz. He thinks he's a designer, but he's not." But no, my stock and trade. The other thing, I think that, and again, it's taught by the Marine Corps. good verbal communication. And that's essential. So what the Marine Corps taught me was this magic thing called command presence, where by your dress, your demeanor, and your posture and grooming, you look like somebody who has to be taken seriously, and that helps in any situation. It helps in interviews, and it helps in your daily interaction in your career.
Good advice. Anthony?
Yes, so do you think that in my lifetime, I will see autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I do actually. In yours, I used to think in mine. I no longer think in mine because that would mean they'd have to really hurry. But no, I think in your, what, you're 25?
21.
Yeah, okay, yeah, for sure. They're on the way. Cruise and Waymo, both are operating fully autonomous taxis now. Cruise is expanding into other cities out of, I think, San Francisco or LA, wherever they are. It's proving to be accepted by the public, and I think it's only a matter of time before urban agglomerations like LA or like New York will get circled off to private traffic, and you'll have to leave your human-driven car at some sort of parking area, and then you transition into a robo-taxi, which takes you to your final destination. And the metro areas, inside the metro areas, will be served totally by autonomous taxis that are always on the move. And people say, well, what about the freedom of being able to get in your car? Well, where's the freedom of sitting in LA freeway traffic for 2.5 hours? So it's coming. Then somebody wrote about 2 years ago, well, what about the handicapped? What are they going to do with autonomous vehicles? Well, hello, that's whom autonomous vehicles primarily benefit, because a blind person can, once helped into an autonomous vehicle, can be driven anywhere. Kids can be taken anywhere. Mothers no longer have to drive the minivan around to take them, to soccer practice and everything. I think it'll be, it kind of diminishes one freedom, but it creates another freedom. The other thing is, visualize yourself in your commute, not having to, not being permitted to drive, but also not having to drive. So you can read the papers, do your emails, read a book, watch videos, do whatever you want on the way home, including having your first evening beverage legally.
Can I say something on that?
Yeah.
How would that work if, like, let's say there was a crash, for example? Whose fault would it be in some ways if it's self-driven cars?
Help me with that one.
Whose fault, who ultimately gets blamed if autonomous vehicles collide, crash?
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I think I leave that one to the trial lawyers, but the trial lawyers aren't going away anytime soon. But one of the sticky questions, by the way, I hope nobody here has a mom or dad who's a trial lawyer. It's, to me, the most despised form of human life. But there's a lot of tricky moral dilemmas as autonomous vehicles get programmed. For instance, say the autonomous vehicle is going down a lane with trees on either side. The autonomous vehicle has 2 adult passengers and 3 kids in the back. Suddenly, a child chasing a ball runs out. If the autonomous vehicle takes evasive action, it hits a tree and kills 5 people. If it holds steady as she goes, it kills the little kid. Who makes that decision? Who programs that into the software? And at some point, people are going to have to sit down and decide which is the lesser of the two evils. Because you're right. I mean, accidents between autonomous vehicles, if enough redundancy is built into the software, et cetera, the reliability will be such that collisions will be few and far between. The estimate is less than 10% of what we have today. So, yeah, it's always going to be a problem. Death on the highway, sadly, will never quite go away. It's the price we pay for mobility.
Could I ask you to thank our panel for their questions? Terrific job, guys. And you get the last word, sir. Share with us, you've got a room full of young people who are going to influence vehicles for the next 50 to 60 years, maybe longer. Your thoughts of advice to them, please.
Well, I'd say yes, do pursue that career. I think the industry is going to change dramatically. And as we were saying before, I think the individually owned vehicle is going to decline in importance. Autonomous vehicles that are sold to large fleets in batches of 200,000 or 300,000 at a time are going to increase, but the industry is going to remain the industry. It's going to require the same focus on cost, reliability, and for the designers, I would say the pretty ones are always going to sell better than the ugly ones, so there's always a huge role for design in the whole thing. In fact, to me, if I had, and I digress a little bit here, if I had to pick one discipline that's more important than any other in the various disciplines that make up an automobile company, engineering, sales, marketing, finance, government relations, procurement and supply, et cetera, the one to me that is by far the most important in moving public opinion and driving sales is design. And to me, the huge error that car companies make is they assign design under engineering and say the engineers will engineer the car and then the designers will put a wrapper on it. It doesn't work that's the way General Motors was doing it when I got there. It doesn't work that way. It's got to be the other way around. The designers have to come up with a world-class concept that everybody falls in love with. Then the engineers look at it and say, we don't know how to do that. And the manufacturing guys look at it and say, we don't know how to build that. And then there's a series of compromises down from the designer's vision to make it feasible. But it's still going to be 10 times better than when you start the other way around. No, I say you're headed for a good career, but remember, the most important thing is once you're in a corporation, you're going to hear all of these priorities that we've got to work on. We've got to reduce the number of stamping hits. We've got to learn to work with cheaper materials. We got to use more plastics, et cetera, and all these things get presented as the next huge challenge. And yeah, they are. Yes, they're important. Yes, corporations need to constantly move forward with materials and methods, but it's all unimportant. It's like the famous story of the pet food company where they're having the big meeting and sales are way down. And the CEO says, I just don't understand it. We buy good ingredients. We've got a great advertising agency. Our ads are award-winning. The labels are pretty. We've got a brilliant distribution system. We're on all the best grocery shelves. What the hell happened to sales? And some guy in the back holds up his hands and says, sir, our dogs don't like the taste. And so everything can be wonderful, but if the dogs don't like the taste, nothing else matters.
We're going to say thank you to our friends who zoomed in with us from all over the world. Thank you very much for that. And for the rest of you, if you have your phones on you, we can get out. Please scan this QR code and take a little survey and give us some feedback on how we did with this event today, how we can make it better. We're going to say goodbye again to our Zoom friends, and then we're going to take a minute or two break, raise the curtain here, and we're going to go out around the Pontiac GXP and have a little walk around with Bob about that product and what the wins and losses were on that one. Okay? So all of you around the world who Zoomed with us, thank you very much for being with us today.